Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing Elroy in the 15-minute pool on ICC. My opponent from Brazil opens with e4, and let's play a Sicilian. I'm going to check my opponent's stats. Let's play d6 on move 2. So this player has 3,600 15-minute games with a peak rating of 1972. That's the year that Fischer won the World Championship, 1972. All right, in knight c6, this is a move that you often see online. I don't see it in tournament competition as much. It's a logical developing move. White kind of plays by analogy with like the Gioco piano, for instance, after e4, e5. But this is not considered to be super challenging unless White wants to transpose into an open Sicilian later by playing d4. So let's see if Elroy does that. He castles. I was intending to play a classical Sicilian based on how he were to develop, especially if he were to go d4 and enter an open Sicilian. So I don't mind having developed my knight to c6. That fits in with my game plan. I'll just play knight f6 and attack his pawn on e4. Very likely he'll defend it with rook e1 or maybe a d3. He plays d3. Okay, so I can opt for a fianchetto of the dark square bishop, or I can play e6, maybe looking to play d5 in the center. I think both plans are viable. I wonder if I play g6, if that invites him to play knight g5, double attacking f7, and then after, say, e6, maybe use that as an excuse to play f4 and try to go for f5. It's kind of out there, that plan, but he might leap at the opportunity to do that. e6 is perfectly fine. I mean, I could definitely see e6 and a later d5 being pesky for White. So let's just play that. He's shown that he doesn't want to push d4, so I don't think I'm going to be lacking space in the center. I think my pawn is going to stay on c5 and control that d4 square. Bishop g4 is a move that I could have perhaps considered on the previous move. It's not a move that you often play in Sicilian positions for black. I do see it at lower levels sometimes. Might have been playable, actually, on the previous move. a4, so this preempts a6, b5 from me in the middle game. I'm just going to play simply and complete my development. Play bishop e7 and castles. I got a nice rating bump based on that last game, so I'm at 24-34. This is my peak rating. So now here, a common mistake, it would be a double question mark blunder, in fact, would be if White played bishop e3. That invites d5. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. The light square bishop moves, and then I would have d4, forking the dark square bishop on e3 and the white knight on c3. So I can try to delay d5 if I want. The problem is, what other moves make sense for me if I want to delay? I could play a6 maybe. Bishop d7 doesn't really help us. In fact, the bishop will probably be better off on b7. Moreover, if I play d5 and there's a trade on d5, this bishop might be able to come out to a more active post like f5. So I'm just going to play a6, giving him another chance to blunder bishop e3. I do not think he'll play that move, but this move is a move that I can point to as a useful move. It controls b5, and maybe I can push pawn b5 later, so I don't mind playing it. I think bishop f4 or bishop g5 will likely be played. Yeah, he plays bishop f4. That's entirely reasonable. So do I want to continue with my d5 plan? I could also try to play e5, but the thing I don't like about e5 is that I weaken the d5 square. Maybe if e5, he'll just play bishop g5 and look to take my knight and try to sink a piece into the d5 square, probably the knight. Yeah, so let's just play this move. Offering to trade pawns in the middle. I don't know if it's in his best interest to take, because if he trades, I will get that light square bishop outside the pawn chain quickly. So let's say e takes d5, bishop, let's say back to a2 maybe. Then I would have bishop f5. So he plays bishop to a2. Maybe he kind of realizes that a trade is not to his benefit. Here I can play knight b4 if I want and harass that light square bishop. On knight b4, he'll probably play bishop b3. It may be possible to play knight b4, bishop b3, bishop d7, and try to go for d5. I know I said I didn't want to place the bishop on d7, but I don't see a drawback to that plan, and since I'm specifically playing it in order to prepare b5, it could be reasonable. Like b5, c4 would be a nice way to cramp that piece of his, that light square bishop. And even though we'd be blocking our queen from the defense of the d-pawn with bishop d7, I would have my knight on b4, which assists in holding that point. Still, though, I'm not completely sure about that. As far as the pawn tension in the center, taking doesn't gain much for me. Pushing could be played, but after d4, knight e2, the center has been closed, and I don't see why I would play that way. Maybe I could play d4, knight e2, b5. How about that? d4, knight e2, b5. Then I get the pawn break-in that I really want to achieve. And yeah, I don't think it's so relevant that he can swing the knight over to the king side, like knight e2 to g3. So maybe d4, knight e2, b5. Let's say a takes b5, a takes b5. Then I have an open file for my rook, too. There's no tactic like bishop takes e6. That won't work. He could play c3 and try to strike at the center, but somehow I think we're going to come out slightly better out of that. Okay. So at first I was a little skeptical of this move, but since I can connect it to the plan of pushing pawn to b5, I've come around to it. And he plays knight b1. All right, so he's going to reroute the knight through d2 or maybe a3. Those are the options that white is looking at, I'm sure. And he played it quick, so he might have been anticipating that move. All right, I'm going to play this all the same. So after a takes b5, a takes b5, my rook on a8 is undefended, and there's only that light square bishop separating us. So I just wanted to make sure that a move like bishop takes e6 didn't work. On bishop takes e6, I could recapture, and my queen would be defending the rook. But it would be slightly irresponsible if you played b5 without understanding the implications of opening the a file with an undefended rook there. Okay, so he plays knight bd2. Where's that knight going? I can take the pawn on a4, but it's doubled and weak there. Moreover, it gives him that c4 square. So I think just bishop b7 is what I'll do. Yeah, let's bring this out onto a diagonal that will probably be relevant in the future. Maybe queen b6 is a move I can play going forward. Knight b4 is still a possibility. So I think there's several avenues that we can pursue here. I'm not sure what he should do because looking at his pawn structure, it's largely fine, but he doesn't have any pawn breaks available. Like, his pawn structure kind of points to the king side. The general rule is that your pawn structure points to the side of the board where you should play. That's a very loose rule, by the way. It's not always true, but it's just a guidepost. But he doesn't have, for instance, like a pawn on f4 to back up like this pawn on e4. There's no like pawn duo working. Bishop h2 looks just like prophylaxis. Maybe he wants to make sure knight h5 never comes with tempo in the future. I don't think there's any deeper meaning behind that move. Maybe he's getting pieces out of the way to play f4 in the future. So queen b6 could be played. Again, I could take that pawn. If knight b4, bishop b3 will always be the answer. Maybe I'll consider knight b4, bishop b3, c4 at some point. And then after d takes c4, trying to go after that e pawn. Let's play queen b6 for now. Connect the rooks together. Get the queen backing up the b pawn. We're just going to ask him what his plan is. I want to see what he has in mind. He could push pawn e5. In that case, I like the look of knight d5 as a reply. Maybe he'll play e5, knight d5, knight e4. Look to activate this knight. Because so long as I keep this pawn on b5, that knight is not coming out through c4. King h1, again, not really sure what the point of that is. Maybe knight g1 and f4, if we're trying to anticipate our opponent's plan. Let's play rook ac8. So even though I'm abandoning the a file, and the a file might open up, I don't think that's a file that either of us will be able to utilize much in the middle game. Maybe if some pieces come off the board, it could be a file that white or black would like to seize. But for now, I like rook ac8 because if ever I want to make that c4 pawn push, this will be nice backup. So knight e5, just looking for a swap. Okay. So ways to respond to that. We could agree to the swap, knight takes knight. We could play knight b4. That move is still pretty interesting. Knight b4, bishop b3. And still look to play c4 in the future. This knight does look at the d7 square, so I have to bear that in mind. So maybe knight b4, bishop b3, rook fd8 would be a decent way of proceeding, with kind of the plan of playing c4, getting him to take it, and then taking e4. I slightly weaken f7 if I pursue this plan, though. That's the only thing that troubles me a bit. Still, I think knight b4 is a pretty good reply. Now, I don't even have to push c4 after that. I can do other things, too. Let's say knight b4, bishop b3, rook fd8, and then maybe f4 from white. Gets complex. What else could I do? I could trade knights and play knight d7. That's solid. I could play rook fd8 immediately. Knight b4 is the move I still want to play. I'm just drawn to this move. What about knight b4, bishop b3? Yeah, again, c4 doesn't work quite yet, unfortunately. Well, actually, maybe it does. Knight b4, bishop b3, c4, d takes c4, knight takes e4. They have the immediate knight d7, though. Well, then I have queen c6. There's some tricky stuff going on there. Okay, I'm going to play this move, and I'm going to figure out the ramifications after bishop b3. I know I have rook fd8 if I don't want to make a decision, but c4 also is pretty interesting, because there's some tactics on this long diagonal. If I can pry open that diagonal, some stuff might happen. Okay, and yeah, he played a move I didn't even really consider, bishop b1. So what about c4 now? So c4, pawn takes, knight takes e4. If knight d7, I like the look of queen c6. That's the move I'm staring at right now. There's also rook fd8, though. Yeah, actually, I'm going to play rook fd8. I don't want to calculate the ramifications of playing c4 quite yet. I think this is just a good move to line up with their queen. I'm a little low on time, so yeah, and he responds with a move that is kind of expected. So now c4 take, knight takes looks pretty good. I think I'm going to pull the trigger on that. Yeah, let's do that move. He might try not to capture because he may know that e4 is weak. But if he doesn't capture, I have stuff like c3 in store. Like, say he plays f5 and just continues with the kingside assault, then I can play c3. And if b takes c3, d takes c3, I'm opening up threats on e4 because the rook is unleashed down the file. So I think this is the right moment to sharpen the play. I mean, c4 is a move that my position has been building up towards, and his bishop on b1 looks kind of ridiculous right now. It does help solidify the pawn chain, but it's sort of begging to be punished somehow, the placement of that bishop there. Also, this is almost a race-style position. Like, he's clearly attacking with the pawns. I said earlier that his position needed to organize a pawn break somehow. Yeah, and he does this, f5. So c3? c3 just seems good. He can't really ignore the attack on the pawn on b2 and the knight, so he's got to take it. I take back with my pawn, and knight takes e4 is working. Yeah, I'm going to play this move without a ton of thought, because I doubt thinking for any longer is going to allow me to find an even better move. That I'd be shocked if there was something better than c3 there. He's still got plenty of time. I think he's playing a little too fast. I've been criticizing opponents' time usage quite a bit in games in the past, but I really do believe that a lot of these opponents I encounter in the 15-minute pool make pretty reckless decisions like pretty quickly. Like if I were white there playing f5, like I would want to know what's happening after c3. It's possible this is somehow playable for him, but I mean, he doesn't want to start thinking now is the point. Like he should already have an idea of what's going on here. I feel like now he's kind of feeling his way through the complications. Okay, so here, what about knight takes e4? Knight takes e4, and I'm coming into f2 very quickly. So if knight takes, does he have queen h5 though? Queen h5 could be a bother. There's also bishop takes, which is pretty solid. Bishop takes might be the easiest way to play this. His knight takes queen h5, and he's hitting f7, and also threatening the knight. Bishop takes looks like it just wins a pawn, simply though. And if pawn takes e6 after that, I can reply with queen takes is the point. Yeah, let's do that. Deny his queen the use of h5 and also f3. He can't bring his queen to f3 either. And I'm threatening that pawn on f5 too. Like if he plays queen e2 right now, bishop takes f5. Just bank another pawn. I don't know how this bishop's going to get in the game on b1. It seems almost permanently ensconced there. Okay, so he takes as expected, and queen takes I think is good. This is interesting because now I'm threatening some nasty stuff, like maybe even queen takes h3. Notice the pin on the g2 pawn for my bishop on e4. Also, this knight on b3 is looking a bit shaky because perhaps I can play bishop takes d3 in the future, and if pawn takes, this knight may be undefended, or if it's defended by the queen, maybe I can play c2 and fork the queen and the bishop. So not only are we up a pawn now, but there's some factors working in our favor too. Yeah, like here, I mean, I'm definitely considering bishop takes d3. Also just taking. I mean, if I take on g4, let's say he takes with the queen looking for a trade. We trade. I could just move my bishop then, but I could also play bishop takes d3. Bishop takes d3, c takes d3, c2. That bishop's a goner. Yeah, I don't think he's coming out too hot out of this. Okay, so this move looks good. Let's just go with it. Simplifying in time pressure makes sense. If time is an issue, you want to trade down. Yeah, and take here. Just looking at any possible way he could disrupt my play after that, but I don't really see it. So, yeah, we'll do that. Attacking his rook, so he's got to take. And now this. Once again, I think he has to take it. Now let's take with the knight, hitting his rook. Also denying rook e1. Our knight controls that square as well. And after this, he's going to have hanging pawns on a4 and d3. So I'm only up one pawn right now. I thought for a second I was up 2 pawns, but it is only 1 pawn. Yeah, we're up a pawn before we play bishop takes d3, and we're still up a pawn. Okay, so now rook takes d3. Anything wrong with that? I could also push past to play b4, or maybe even knight b4, but rook takes d3 immediately attacks his knight. So I like it. Because where's this knight going to go? c1 looks like a poor square. a5, it also seems out of bounds there. Not too many viable options remaining. Yeah, this game, regardless of the result, the first half of this game largely was determined by the pawn breaks. You know, him trying to arrange f4, f5, and me playing c5, c4. And I think he should have slowed down right around, say, moves, I don't know, probably starting move 11, because that's where I played d4 and attacked his knight right here. Like, all these moves leading up to f4, c4, f5, c3, like, those were very important, and he played them pretty quick. And I'm skeptical of that. Okay, so this is possible. I was looking at the line. What was I looking at? Take b3. He takes c2 either way. Let's say with that rook. We trade. I give a check on b1. He has to block with his bishop. He just resigned. Okay, he didn't wait to see what I was going to play. But let's calculate this in our head for a moment. So I was thinking about playing rook takes b3. And then let's say rook a takes c2. Rook takes c2. Rook takes c2. And now rook b1 check. His king is caught on the back rank. He has to play bishop g1 to block. Now, that position is not yet winning for me because I cannot play bishop c5 and gang up on the bishop on g1 because his rook on c2 controls that c5 square. Moreover, he's threatening rook c8 check, whereupon if he got that in, I would have to play bishop f8 and block. So I'm pretty sure I'm just winning that position. I mean, I have the move and he's pinned, but I would probably play a Luft move. Maybe something like h6 just to allow for king h7. Yeah, something like that. And then, you know, he might take on b5. And after it takes, I'll be up a pair of pawns. And also his bishop will remain pinned. So it's probably winning for black. I'm 99.9% sure that's winning for black. But should he have resigned? I think that's a little premature. I mean, also resigning on your own move is not recommended. You know, unless you're like getting mated in one and your opponent's in the process of playing that move, then maybe. Even then, you probably want to wait and see what they play. But yeah, he just threw in the towel after rook c1. So let's go have a look. So yeah, I played this move order intending a classical Sicilian, which is d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and knight c6. This is the classical variation. But my opponent played bishop c4. And like I said, I see this a lot online. It seems like online players are a fan of the early bishop development for white. Maybe they've played a lot of games like in the Joko Piano, or they're just trying to apply the same strategy they do against e5 on move 1. For whatever reason, you just see this a lot online. So I play knight c6. There's not a whole lot of established theory when white develops this slowly in the Sicilian. I mean, there are plenty of games and examples in this, but for black, it makes sense to have a couple setups in mind you might go for, but don't try to study like particular moves here because you know, there's any number of slow approaches white could take that don't involve opening the center and trying to attack you. And when the play slows down like that, it's more important to like what type of setup you're going to adopt rather than what move order you're going to play to reach a middle game position. So you should have a pattern in mind as to how you want to play. So I played e6. I mentioned that g6 is also possible. A lot of times when white doesn't control the d4 square in the Sicilian, fianchettoing your dark square bishop with g6 and bishop g7 is a good idea because you can play for control of that square in the long term. I mentioned bishop g4, like you might be wondering why this move is not played. And like I said, here it might actually be playable. There are a couple lines in the Sicilian, like there's a system called the Kopek system where often black's best response is a bishop g4 move to pin the knight on f3. You got to make sure you're not running into tactics involving bishop takes f7.
Check.
But after king takes f7, there's no discovered attack with this knight that's going to like win our bishop on g4. So that's not an issue. So maybe this somewhat offbeat move is okay here. I don't know. I still kind of prefer the way I played it with e6 and keeping this bishop back. But let me just see with the engine if it finds any reason not to like this move. h3, let's say bishop h5. Yeah, this is probably fine. I mean, sometimes you're in danger of the bishop being out of play after a subsequent g4, bishop g6. But g4 does entail some risk for white. It's not like you can just throw the pawn out there and say, well, you have to go back. I mean, he is weakening his king. So it would be interesting to play bishop g4 right here. Nevertheless, I played e6. He played a4, bishop e7, knight c3. I would say these moves are all pretty normal. a6. So the blunder I was hoping he would play is bishop e3. This is kind of a flag in the Sicilian. You should be cautious when you have a bishop on e3 and a knight on c3, particularly in non-open Sicilian lines, because you're liable to run into this d5 move, this well-timed d5 move. And here I'm doing it with tempo on his bishop. And after pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, my pawn is sufficiently backed up by my knight and queen, two defenders. He's got two attackers, so he can't win a pawn by taking there. His bishop moves and then d4. I've seen this trick dozens of times in tournament games and non-tournament games. It's just very widespread. So got to watch out for that minor piece fork. So he plays bishop f4. I played d5, bishop a2. Yeah, and here I have a number of ways to proceed. So I started using a little time here. How much time did I spend on the next move? Yeah, about 2 minutes. Originally, I kind of wasn't really looking at d4 because I know from experience sometimes it's better not to release the tension by pushing. Sometimes white wants you to do that so they can not worry about the center anymore. The center becomes closed and they can start operating on whichever wing they choose, usually the king side. But it just seemed good because I can connect it to this plan of pushing b5. Otherwise, the b5 move with this knight sitting on c3 is hard to achieve because he's got one extra attacker there. And now with the bishop on f4, I can't play rook b8, which is like a customary move you might play to prepare b5, because he just wins my rook. So that's what was the tipping point in favor of d4, the fact that I could follow up with b5. I think if I was playing d4 just to attack the knight, just to kick the knight away, that's not good enough. You need a follow-up to that. You shouldn't play moves just for the sake of one-move attacks. Maybe in bullet you're allowed to do that, but all other forms of chess, you got to be playing moves with a specific purpose and hopefully a follow-up in mind. So he plays the knight back to b1. Yeah, and starting here, I kind of criticized how fast my opponent played. Like he has 13:35. Maybe knight b1's fine if he thought about it in advance, but I mean, knight e2 is a pretty serious alternative as well. So b5, knight bd2, played quickly. That move's probably okay. Knight bd2 because he's just completing his development once again. So queen b6. It just seemed to me like the moves he was playing right around here came without much particular thought. Like, when I played the c4 pawn break, I bet he wasn't really, I don't want to say anticipating that, but I bet he hadn't totally considered the ramifications of that move. Yeah, and here I thought bishop b3 was a better way of playing. I mean, on b3, the bishop does everything it does on b1, except it's not tucked away in the corner. It's operating on a useful diagonal already. I mean, it's pretty hard to justify bishop b1 unless that bishop's going to emerge via c3 or something soon. Okay, so a line that I was thinking about here is c4, take, and then knight takes e4. I just wasn't quite sure because this does open up knight d7, forking my queen and rook at almost any time. But say he plays it here, I do have queen c6. I saw this move in the game. And the point is, if he takes here, I can play, yeah, I actually have knight g3. I didn't see that move. I was thinking knight takes d2. Taking the piece and setting up the threat of queen takes g2 checkmate, and also hitting his rook on f1. But knight g3 is even nicer, and that actually forces checkmate. He's got to take the knight or move his king, and against any of those three moves, we're checkmating him on g2, thanks to that queen-bishop battery. I thought on queen c6 maybe he could play knight back to e5, but I do see now that that would just lose for the same reason, knight g3. Well, if I had known that, I probably would have gone for c4, because it looks like the tactics are working out for me. Another line is, if he takes here, and then plays knight d7, ask yourself what would black play in that case. I won't play the move because I have the engine on and it's going to show you the answer. But if white were to play knight d7 here, how would I reply? You could pause your video if you like. Okay, so I believe the answer will be bishop takes g2. Queen b7. Well, let's check bishop takes g2, because that's kind of similar. King takes, queen here, check. Or to c6. Yeah, and this is kind of the point. Since we're taking that pawn with check, he doesn't have time to chop off our rook on f8. And here I'm going to go take his knight on the next move. But I guess the computer likes queen b7 even better. Yeah, that makes sense. Because if here, take, king g1, I can take his rook, but even better is to take this pawn first. Threatening mate, still threatening the rook, and this knight is not getting out either. Okay, so this is completely crushing. So the tactics do favor me. So maybe I didn't need that rook fd8 move to preface it. Oh, and I'm analyzing this with the bishop on b3, by the way. Let's see if the bishop being on b1 makes any difference. I wouldn't think it does. Here I played rook fd8, which the computer likes. Does this make any difference at all? c4 take, knight takes. Knight takes, bishop takes. And now f3. Huh. So why was this not possible in the other line? F3 when the bishop's on B3. Could I maybe insert like a capture in that case? So now the bishop is kind of stuffed on the diagonal, and maybe he will get a chance for knight d7. Like if I were to drop this back here, now knight d7 is possible because queen c6 is toothless. I'm not attacking anything. There, he can just grab the rook. Yeah, a lot of what you do as a chess player is compare variations, especially in your serious games. So, he played bishop b1, but I wonder if this c4, take, 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 take. So what if he plays f3 here? Okay, it's possible. I guess it's just equal. Yeah, I can respond with take, which if I responded with take when his bishop was on b1, it wouldn't have the same effect because I wouldn't have been attacking that bishop. Here I'm actually attacking their light square bishop. So it's a Zwischenzug. B takes c4. And after knight takes c4, hitting my queen, I assume rook takes c4. Yeah, and if take here, bishop takes c2, and the computer is liking black's compensation. I'm down 1 point of material here, but I have nice compensation, probably mainly in the form of this pawn on d3, which will advance, or the pawn on d4, which will advance to d3 very soon. All told, I do think bishop b3 was probably a better shot for him. It just feels like the right move. So bishop b1, I played rook fd8, and he played f4. Again, like, he has 11 minutes, 45 seconds. He's basically doubled me up on the clock. I might be slightly better, or maybe I have slightly the better chances from this position, but that's a pretty sizable time differential, and he needs to use that to his advantage. Like, playing f4, just kind of throwing that pawn out there and taking 9 seconds to do so, that's not going to cut it. Certainly after c4, I think white should take some time, because I think with his next move, he pretty much blows the game, or nearly blows it. And you can see the eval jump right there. So after c4, initiating play in the center and on the queen side, he's roughly at, let's say, a quarter pawn to a half pawn deficit, but after f5, the game is probably borderline losing, up to almost, yeah, a 2-pawn deficit and climbing, perhaps. So here he did spend a little bit longer, but I still think that's insufficient. I think he's got to be in full-on emergency mode here. I mean, I'm advancing into his half of the board. I have threats on d3 and also the pawn push to c3, and with his f5 move, he didn't address that. He just kind of plowed forward and hoped for the best, but maybe if he had spent longer, he could have come up with something. So the engine likes a takes b5, a takes b5. Probably it does make sense for me to recapture. Because if I push c3, I mean, maybe there's some complications with him taking. Yeah, so take back is normal. Knight df3. Okay, so at least this way he's backing up this knight, but more importantly, he's backing up the d-pawn. The queen is now defending it, and c3 is not coming with an attack on his knight. And I'm better, but yeah, I mean, this doesn't look easy for me by any means. So he needs to buckle down, spend the time, and try to find a defense here. Because after f5, c3, he's hurting. He took. I took at the d-pawn, opening the file. Yeah, knight here. a5 probably would have been good to throw in. That's the move the engine likes here, attacking the queen. Yeah, that would have been good, because my queen wants to go and take that pawn on e6 when he captures. And if they throw in a5, let's say queen a7, I think it'd be too risky to play queen d6, because I'm one piece away from his bishop on h2 on that diagonal. So yeah, let's say queen a7, and now a knight move. I mean, we can even compare it to knight b3. This move might still be good, but at least when he takes here, I can't recapture with my queen. But he played knight b3. We take on e4. If knight takes e4, the queen h5 move was the move I was a bit concerned about, trying to attack here. Maybe it doesn't matter. The computer said, don't worry about it at all. Rook takes f2, queen takes f2. I'm threatening mate on g2. He can take here with check, but after king h8, it looks like his threats run out. Yeah, he can't really deal with the threat on g2, can he? How's he going to block this light square bishop? Yeah, and there's not great coordination for white on the queen side either. His pieces are kind of scattered. Okay, so maybe I could have been a little more merciless and played knight takes e4. It still somehow looks slightly dangerous. Yeah, queen e2 maybe. This attacks the knight. Now d takes e4 is enabled because he's not pinned along the d file. And he covers f2. Okay, so maybe that's less clear. I like bishop takes e4 because not only is it threatening f5, but also it allows me to play bishop takes d3 and then that c2 move to follow that I was talking about. He took here. I took with the queen. Knight g4. Yeah, another mistake, but it's pretty bad at this point. Yeah, minus 2 to 3 territory for black. So knight g4. I just took. Computer thinks this immediately is even stronger. Take and then c2. Wonder why that is. Bishop takes, knight takes. Maybe because I'm on this now too with my queen. That's probably why. Yeah. Also, the game continuation was plenty strong as well. This was just a simple path. I get to exchange off a bunch of pieces. I'm still up a pawn after c2, bishop takes c2, knight takes c2. And he's got just a bevy of weak pawns. We've got threats all over the place. Yeah, he played rook a2, but we take d3, so now we're up 2 pawns. The knight's attacked. I was kind of speculating where his knight was going to move, but it's pretty tough to find a good square. I mean, at minimum, he's going to be down 2 pawns with a much worse position. So he did this and resigned. And I was saying the line that I was probably going to play was rook takes b3. Let's say take here. Rook takes c2, rook takes c2. And now just because rook c8 would necessitate a bishop block by me if he were to play that, I would probably play check first just to force his bishop back here. And then a luft move. I think I said h6, allowing king h7. The computer seems to like f6. Yeah, and that's also plenty good. I think of something like take and take. Not only is my b-pawn dangerous, like supported by the bishop and the rook, but also he just has trouble getting out of this pin situation. You could imagine if king h2, I can give a check here. And if he wants to play g3 and block, he's opening himself up for this. And I'm going to win another pawn. His king was overloaded trying to defend the bishop and the g-pawn. Yeah, so he resigned. Maybe a little premature. Once again, I don't really see the point of resigning on your opponent's move. At least, you know, wait and see what they're going to do. Maybe they'll make a quadruple question mark blunder on the next move. But yeah, I probably wasn't going to mess this up. So yeah, a game that was determined by time management, I think. I think White could have done better to use more time in critical positions, especially when push came to shove with c4. And also, yeah, the effects of this pawn break, that was the other big factor in this game. I don't think White's opening strategy is that great. I do not recommend this type of line for White. I think it's just too routine. It's hard to get pawn breaks going for White in this line. That's one of the main problems of this development. I mean, if you look at the position, like going by the textbook, like his minor pieces are on good squares. But the thing is, like, you don't have a lot of pawn action in this line. It's not always about how your minor pieces are placed. Your minor pieces have to work in concert with your pawns too. And if you don't have a pawn break, you often don't have a plan. There's a book by Quality Chess called Pump Up Your Rating by a Swedish international master Axel Smith. And he talks about that in his book. He says, no pawn break, no plan. And I fully agree with that. I think pawns are incredibly important. And here my pawns turned out to be more flexible and useful than his, especially when I started breaking with c4. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be back tomorrow with another one. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.